So I had this assignment in my weekly writing class: write about a big lesson you've learned in life, and give the person you became an Indian name, and give the lesson an Indian name. So the person I became was Broken Arrow, and the lesson was trying too hard. So I fear that I did something wrong, which precipitated my descent into chronic fatigue syndrome. So CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, has kind of like held me in a vice since 1988. When I try to push those boundaries, those limits on what I can do physically. So it's always physical exertion that brings on chronic fatigue syndrome relapses. So if I live within these boundaries, I don't get relapses. But if I ever exercise too much, I get a relapse. Now, I used to deal with my anxiety in part by exercising a lot. Now I can't go out and go for a jog. I'll get a relapse. I can walk, up to half an hour to an hour a day, probably 4 or 5 times a week without problem. But if I was to say walk an hour a day, every day, 7 days a week, within a month I'd get a relapse, maybe within 2 weeks. But I could probably do it 4 days a week, just kind of give you an example of the limits that I live within. But I have this like haunting fear that I made some bad choices in early 1988, and these bad choices led me out of normal health into chronic illness. I was taking 22 units at Sierra Community College that spring semester of 1988. I also worked a gardening job for about 30 hours a week. That previous semester, the fall semester in 1987, I'd completed 21 units with straight A's for the first time in my life. I'd been accepted into UCLA as a pre-economics major. So on the surface, everything seemed great. I was going from success to success. I had $25,000 in the bank from working in landscaping. I could do 120 pull-ups and 1,400 push-ups in an hour. Might have been stronger than at any time previous in my life. But there were warning signs that something was wrong. I was getting up at about 4 a.m. every morning to study calculus, which was my most difficult subject because my math background was so weak. The last time I ever cheated in a class was the previous semester in trigonometry. I remember my mother saying, "You have to work so hard at community college. What will happen to you at university?" I remember my sister spent the Christmas break of 1987 with me. She slept in my room and she said that I cursed in my sleep. I had been in peak physical shape when I started that fall 1987 semester, but by November I was getting these colds and flus on a regular basis. I would fast to recover quickly, and I'd drink huge amounts of water, like 15, 16 cups of water a day. I'd go to school when I was still weak. At times I'd lose up to 15 pounds before bouncing back. And the harder I tried, the more I compressed my neck and hunched my shoulders and kind of collapsed my torso. Also, I wasted time on such frivolity as Sierra College's The Dating Game, which featured Sierra's sexiest men and women. I lost. I was still a virgin at this point, 21 years of age. I remember thinking, I'll either break through or break down, saying that to myself as I pressed through February 1988. Either way, I'll get love. Perhaps the first recorded outbreak of chronic fatigue syndrome was in Lake Tahoe between 1984 and 1987, and 2 physicians that during that time diagnosed 259 patients with that disease. So I was living in Newcastle, California, in zip code 95658. I was 45 minutes north of Sacramento and about 2 hours drive on Interstate 80 from Lake Tahoe. I came down with mononucleosis in late January 1986. That hobbled me for several months. I never experienced any illness like it. All the others had gone away after a couple of weeks at most. This one just dragged on. I could make it to class and I could make it to work, but I felt wiped out all the time. When I finished that semester of spring semester 1986 with a B average, I took a job in landscaping. And that outdoor work restored me to health. I enjoyed it so much, I dropped most of my classes in the fall of 1986 so I could keep working outside. Just took 2 classes, 6 units that semester. Working landscaping in winter, however, was miserable. I returned to school full-time in the spring of 1987, and I also worked full-time outside to maintain my health. My father got 2 PhDs in 18 months each, and he did it by rising at 4 a.m. every day Now he was warning me that I was spending my health to get my wealth and that I'd be better served by a more moderate schedule. Of course he was right. I wonder where it all went wrong. I wonder if it was the year that I drove around with a leak in my gas tank, kind of filling my Volkswagen Bug with these noxious fumes whenever I turned a corner too sharply. I wonder if it was the dangerous pesticides I carried in the back seat to kill weeds. Was it the ditch water? We got our water through a ditch that would flow through the country, and then we would treat it, but sometimes our treatment plan wasn't working, and I got giardia. So, like all the families around us, we chlorinated the water and boiled it. My parents drank it. They never got sick. So, who knows who murdered my life? All I know is I got what felt like the flu in mid-February 1988. After a couple of days in bed, I struggled back to school and to work, only to have a relapse a few days later. This became a pattern for the rest of my spring semester in 1988. A few days of work and school, then a relapse. Nothing like this had hit me before. This was like mono. It was constant. Now I was getting mono-like attacks, but they came and went depending on how much I physically exerted myself. Abundant rest left me feeling okay, but weak. I knew my body engine had suddenly broken. I'd gone from the best health of my life to the worst health of my life. And it seemed to happen overnight. Remember, I was frustrated by falling out of shape, and I went for a 3-mile run one Sunday afternoon. Within a couple of hours, I had a severe relapse. It would be the last time in my life that I'd complete such a jog. Since then, I've lived as an invalid. And what I most needed was rest. I felt under pressure at work because I had overordered hundreds of dollars worth of plants, and I had to get them in the ground. First doctor I saw was in March at Sierra College. He wondered if I had AIDS. I was still a virgin. I took the test. It was negative. My parents accompanied me to the next doctor, wondered if I had the Epstein-Barr virus. It's another trendy disease of the time. Negative. I did not have it. Remember, my mother wrote a long letter of introduction for my doctors describing my symptoms. Recurring viral symptoms, fever, sore throat, swollen lymph glands, hives, fatigue, malaise, headaches. His dirty socks always smelled terrible, as though something died. I dropped down to 15 units, half the number of hours I worked, and I got through that spring semester of 1988 with A's in every class but calculus, a B. That summer I worked moderately, took a couple of classes. As I increased my studies over the last week of summer school, I felt my body run down, another relapse wash over me. My parents urged me not to go to UCLA in the fall of 1988, but I went anyway, hoping that a different environment would help me feel better. Remember, I napped at a couple of stops along Interstate 5 before cresting the Grapevine, the mountains leading to Southern California around 2 a.m. Saw all the lights of the city below me. I felt excited. This would be the place where I would recover my health, and I would make it big. Over the next 4 weeks at the UCLA campus in Westwood, I slept in the bushes beside the girls' softball field. I didn't want to spend my money to get better accommodations. My diet largely consisted of peanuts, raisins, and oatmeal, because they didn't go bad in the heat in my car. So I had 2 health reasons for risking Southern California. One, perhaps there was something in my environment at home that was making me sick. 2, my parents knew an eccentric practitioner of hormone replacement therapy, Dr. Norman Beals, successfully treated my mother's stepmother, really, premenstrual syndrome, PMS. So I drove to see Dr. Beals in Santa Ana. He ran these tests in my endocrine system that showed low thyroid, low testosterone levels. He pumped me full of testosterone, pumped me full of thyroid, gamma globulin, vitamin C, B6, B complex. Helped me feel better, but as that fall semester of 1988 rolled on, I just kept getting relapse after relapse. So I've been struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm about to graduate from a 3-year Alexander Technique teaching program. Doing better now, and I want to pass on the benefits of the technique to my students. But I'm still a broken arrow. Did not become the world transformer that I dreamed about as a kid. Never graduated from college, let alone got a PhD. Never made much money, and I've never married. On the bright side, I now live and move in tranquility. I might even be capable of loving someone.